Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Americans for Limited Government podcast. I am Frank McCaffrey, and we've got a lot going on. Please subscribe to this channel, and we are joined by ALG President Rick Manning. Rick has just attended, he sent me this information, attended a Council of Economic Advisors briefing on the state of the economy. And Rick, this is not Obama's economy anymore. Is that correct?
No, it really isn't. In the last 3 years, the economy has seen some dramatic shifts. While the unemployment rate was going down under Obama, what we didn't see was really dramatic improvement in terms of labor participation. We didn't see wage growth. We didn't see a lot of things that we're seeing in the Trump economy. What's more, the unemployment rate has continued to go down. And in December, in fact, there were fewer number of people unemployed than at any time since the year 2000. Just hear that. There have been over 20 million more people entering the workforce. In fact, over 21 million more people entered the workforce since the last time we had the number of unemployed as low as it is today. The unemployment rate itself in December was as low as it's been since 1969. This stuff didn't happen by accident. It happened because President Trump enacted policies in terms of cutting taxes, cutting regulations, and enacting fair trade policies, fair and reciprocal trade policies, and reworking the world's economy. It also happened because the president took the brakes off of the energy development in this country, and as a result, we have become virtually energy self-sufficient. And as a result, we are able to produce and even export liquefied natural gas. We do export oil. We also import oil because we have some refinery issues. But the fact is, we are benefiting from the results of this president's efforts to allow business to do their thing, allow us to be able to create an economy that grows based upon markets and not government proscripts, and most importantly, is creating an environment where people have jobs, people's wages are going up, and hope is being restored amongst people at all economic levels, because the wages are actually going up significantly faster for the bottom 20% than they are for the top 20%. And that's a change from the Obama administration, where income inequality was expanding. In this economy, the people who are making the least are benefiting the most on a percentage basis from how much money they're getting in terms of wage increases. And those jobs, they're going to African Americans who have lowest unemployment rate in recorded history, and they're going to Hispanics who have lowest unemployment rate in recorded history. At least they have within the last 3 months. It bounces up and down a little bit, and so we're seeing low unemployment across the board, and reaching all sectors of the economy, reaching all income levels of the economy, reaching across ethnic and religious lines to affect everybody, giving hope in all communities, hope that had been long given up in many communities based upon economic stagnation. And the truth is just an inability to get a job and have real investment in their communities to build jobs and develop new employment opportunities. So it's a great economy. It's helping everybody, and it's not the Obama economy. This is the Trump economy, because guess what? Tax cuts, regulation cuts, and fair and reciprocal trade policy matters.
Okay, now yes, I remember when that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 went through, and it was like a businessman's dream come true. They'd waited many years to see that law go through, and Trump really went through and made a lot of people happy with that. He went through line by line with that law. Now, you sent me a quote here. It's just ridiculous. Now, a very powerful congressman from South Carolina, James Clyburn, who we've dealt with in the past here, said that this is not the lowest unemployment rate in history for African Americans, because you're not counting slavery. There was unemployment was very low for African Americans when it came to slavery. Was that a fair comment to make?
That's the most absurd comment in the history of the world. You know, slavery is compulsory labor. You're not getting a wage. You're not getting paid. It isn't employment. It is slavery. Okay. So by saying that the unemployment rate is not as low as it was under slavery, is showing a unique inability to understand what unemployment is. Employment is a voluntary transaction where I give labor to somebody in exchange for money. If I don't like the amount of money they're offering, I take my labor and I move it to somebody who's going to give me more. Or if I don't like the labor they want me to do, I move it somewhere else where I'm able to do more. That's employment. And you didn't have that under slavery. James Clyburn should know this as an African American representing South Carolina. He should know that slaves didn't get to move from plantation to plantation based upon, gee, I really would prefer to work in the house rather than work in the field. They didn't get to do that.
No.
Slaves didn't get a wage. They got substandard housing, or they had housing, they had food, but they didn't have a wage. They did not have the capacity to move on, to change, to move locations. They had no capacity, no freedom. And that's the nature of slavery. They were branded, so they didn't end up being able to mix with other slaves and other plantations. So you get right down to it. James Clyburn is his inability to give President Trump credit for basic economic improvements and for the things where credit is due, so skews his view that he sits there and he says, he tries to create a false analogy between slavery and actual employment. And perhaps it's time for the people of South Carolina to show James Clyburn what unemployment really is. And that means not being sent back to Washington, D.C. to make over $180,000 a year to make stupid statements like that.
Yeah, it also brought up some painful memories, you know, when African Americans were literally viewed as three-quarters of a man. You know, it's just horrible, horrible memories that it brought back. Now, switching the subject here, coronavirus, you know, it's just something that we can't stop studying up on and reading about. The news reports keep coming about it. Do you believe that coronavirus actually has some positives for the economy, and maybe people are looking outside of China?
Well, coronavirus, first of all, coronavirus is horrible. A lot of people are being affected. We have thousands of deaths reported in China as a result of it. And so it is a terrible thing. The Chinese government the other day ordered people to go back to work and factories to reopen because the factories weren't able to deliver the goods that were being promised from China. The reason they did that is because companies, multinational companies, depend upon suppliers in China to provide them with the retail goods and other parts that they might use for car repair and to sell you out of a Walmart or places like that. So they depend on those goods to arrive. And with modern technology, they have something called just-in-time delivery, which means when something gets sold off the shelf at a Walmart, there's automatically an order for that, you know, sent to the supplier. And in many cases, that supplier's in China. And they don't have huge stocks of inventory domestically waiting to go fill that shelf. Those items are ordered directly from the supplier, who then ships it and and so there is really a very little lag between the actual purchase at the cash register and the item being shipped from China to replace that item. So that's modern retail establishment. China, because of the coronavirus, is having a hard time meeting the just-in-time delivery needs of its customers. As a result, those customers may have to and should be looking at alternative sources for those very goods that they currently get from China. That is exactly what was intended to have happen by the tariffs that President Trump imposed on Chinese goods. The idea was to get American retailers and American companies to find alternative supply chain locations, whether it be Vietnam, South Korea, or Mexico or the United States. It didn't matter. The idea was to provide alternative supply chain locations to move them from China, so China could not extort us by cutting off that supply chain, arbitrarily denying U.S. consumers the goods that they're used to getting on the shelves. So if the coronavirus, and I think it is, if the coronavirus is having an impact on the supply chain, then the companies like Walmart will have a real interest in moving their supply chain, broadening their supply chain, and extending it outside of China, lessening the stranglehold the Chinese government has on our retail goods, on our retail industry, and our ability to actually have goods on the shelves when we want to have them. So the positive impact of this horrible disease is it may force companies to expand their supply chain outside of China, which is a desirable end in the long term in terms of our own economic security and not being reliant upon China for a whole variety of goods and services.
And as were you saying, just let me confirm that means we could move our supply chain to the United States of America, and that could bring manufacturing jobs back here.
There's certainly a push to remove the supply chain in the U.S. As an example, under the USMCA, which was just signed into law, the parts requirement in order for cars that are made in America or made in the North Atlantic, the Canada, U.S., and Mexico, is that 3/4 of the parts are made in one of those three countries. The previous under NAFTA, that was about 2/3 of the parts. So there's a demand for a significant increase, about 10% increase in the amount of parts that have to be made in one of those three countries. As a result, places where those parts used to be made, shipped from, China among others, those operations will have to be shifted to the U.S., Canada, or Mexico in order to still have the zero tariff rate on those vehicles that they currently enjoy as being domestically manufactured. So yes, that would be shifting supply chain from China. An example where shifting the supply chain from China or elsewhere to Canada, U.S., or Mexico as a direct result of USMCA. And certainly with the opportunity zones that the president's put in place and many of the tax incentives the tax advantages for manufacturing here, one can make a good case that we will be seeing manufacturing jobs returning to America. And Frank, in the first 3 years of the Trump administration, we've already had about 500,000 manufacturing jobs, new manufacturing jobs created in America, manufacturing jobs that President Obama said, I can't just wave a magic wand and make them appear. Well, Donald Trump did wave a magic wand. That magic wand was tax cuts, regulatory cuts, and trade policies that made sense. And that's what's brought 500,000 manufacturing jobs back to America. And with USMCA, we're going to see even more of that.
Well, that's something that's really needed. If you remember, Trump was commenting in his 2017 inaugural address about the abandoned factories around this country. And man, I'll tell you, I've seen many of them, and it would be nice to see them become not abandoned and have some stuff being made in them and have some jobs being created and some money being made. So let's hope that that's what we see more of. And it sounds like that's what we're on track to see. Okay, there's two more topics before we go that we got to talk about. One, a longtime associate of Donald Trump, Roger Stone, has received a sentencing. Do you think it's ridiculous that do you think he gets a pardon? That's another question.
Well, first of all, the sentence was for 3 years, 4 months. Remember the U.S. Department of Justice prosecutors, the Obama prosecutors, the Mueller team, recommended 7 to 9 years in jail, and which got rescinded by William Barr and criticized by President Trump. And the judge apparently agreed, saying that was way too long, and imposed a sentence of 3 years, 4 months. Now, in terms of whether or not the judge will now also look at whether or not Roger Stone should get a new trial, because the jury foreman of the trial admitted after the fact that she was in fact a Democrat candidate for Congress, had posted on social media in advance of the trial multiple things about Roger Stone and his guilt, as well as about the Trump, the Mueller investigation, meaning that she lied. She lied when she was interviewed by the judge, and was interviewed and said, no, I haven't paid any, I'm got a clear mind on this, I haven't made up my mind. So that's a real question of fact of whether or not the jury pool was tainted based upon the inclusion of this one the jury foreman who clearly had her mind made up prior to the case ever being heard. And the role of the jury foreman can direct a jury and make the arguments. So clearly, the jury foreman having this predisposition and this advocacy for punishment of Roger Stone and conviction of Roger Stone before any of the facts were laid out did not provide Roger Stone a fair trial. And as a result, the judge hopefully will order a new trial to cover that in order to determine whether he was guilty or innocent.
Okay, now another question here. Michael Bloomberg, who is being accused of trying to buy his way into the presidency in the Democratic nomination, absolutely skewered at the Las Vegas debate, and many people commenting, different candidates commenting that the best thing that Donald Trump has going for him is some of the things being said in the Democratic debates, the way they're tearing each other apart. Have you seen the Democrats tear each other apart and tear one person down quite like they did with Michael Bloomberg at any point?
Well, I have actually, but Michael Bloomberg, here's the most interesting comment. There are a couple of comments out of the Democrat debate that I thought were interesting. Number one, I don't remember who said this, but somebody said, it may have been a comment after the fact, what's interesting is the Democrats should actually, the question is whether or not they'll actually nominate a Democrat for president. Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat. He's a socialist. He's an independent member of the Senate who chooses to caucus with the Democrats. But he's not a Democrat. He's not a registered party member. And Michael Bloomberg has, when he was mayor of New York, was a Republican. Then he shifted to be an independent. And then he decided he wanted to be a Democrat in order to run for the presidency. Yeah. So under anybody's honest view, he has no ties to be a Democrat. In fact, when asked about whether or not the person who gets a majority of delegates, who gets the most delegates, if they didn't have a majority going into the convention, should be the nominee, or whether or not it should be left up to the convention to decide, Michael Bloomberg said they have a process, meaning Democrats have a process. He didn't say we have a process. He said they have a process. So he's not a Democrat. He doesn't self-identify as a Democrat. So even in this world where you can self-identify as anything in the entire world, because I can self-identify with a squirrel, and people would in the left would have to call me a squirrel. Although some people call me a squirrel anyway. He doesn't self-identify as a Democrat as he inadvertently admitted in the debate. Bernie Sanders doesn't identify as a Democrat. He says he's an independent who caucuses with Democrats. He identifies as a socialist/communist. So you've got and yet they're the two frontrunners right now for the Democratic nomination. So the question is, will the Democrats nominate a Democrat? And that's to be determined. The other interesting thing that Michael Bloomberg, this is why he really got beat up, he made everybody mad because his campaign staff suggested that the laggards in the race should drop out so he can have a one-on-one shot with Bernie Sanders in the Super Tuesday primaries, which are on Tuesday following. It's not this upcoming Tuesday, but it's the following Tuesday.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to have a one-on-one shot with Sanders and get everybody else out of the way. This is from a guy who hasn't even been on a ballot yet.
Yeah.
Hasn't even been on a ballot yet. He's not on the ballot in South Carolina. He won't even be on a ballot until Super Tuesday, based on his own decision on how he wanted to run his campaign. So now he wants all those people who spent a year running for president, a year or more running for president, to drop out and give him a free path, because he spent almost $500 million in an attempt to buy the presidency. And a lot of those candidates who's put their hard work and toil, and I'm not a big fan of any of them. The fact is, they've worked for it. They've actually pressed the flesh, met voters. And now you say, well, I spent a lot of money, so you need to get out of the way so I can have a clear shot at Bernie. Otherwise, Bernie's going to win. Well, if I had spent a lot of time trudging around in Iowa and New Hampshire while he was busy buying ads out in New York, I think I'd tell him to pound sand And the last person I would want to have as my nominee would be a guy who thought he could not only buy the nomination, but Bigfoot everybody else out because he's got enough money, and they should just bow down to his all-knowing authority. So yeah, Bloomberg got pounded. He should have gotten pounded, and he's going to get pounded more because, quite honestly, he's not used to people standing up to him. And oh, by the way, he's also not 5'8". Elizabeth Warren's 5'8". Take a look at the pictures. She's got at least 3 inches on him.
Wow.
Not that we care about height, but they didn't give him a box, much to his chagrin.
Well, you know, Michael Bloomberg's probably spent the last 2 or 3 decades of his life just getting everything he wants with his money, and you know, can't do that necessarily when it comes to the voters. You can't trick the voters.
Well, and Frank, a final line on that. You know, maybe he was 5'8" when he started, but after the Democrats started pounding on him and kept pounding on him, he was reduced to 5'4", 5'5" behind that podium. So they may have knocked 3 inches off of him during the debate. They beat him up so bad. So, but that's that's the game, and he wanted to be in it, and now he gets to face actual opposition and have his words and his actions of the past judged. And it will be interesting to see how Democrat voters respond to Michael Bloomberg as a candidate.
Well, I did see the Democrats skewer one candidate a few years back. I'm sure you remember it, a guy by the name of Howard Dean. And Howard Dean was not electable. He was kind of like a politician by default. He ended up accidentally becoming governor of Vermont after the sitting governor had a heart attack, and so he was basically a doctor who kind of accidentally became a presidential candidate. And he showed his eccentricities often during on the campaign trail. They skewered him during the debates, and then eventually he gave his famed, after losing in Iowa,
his primal scream, the Dean primal scream.
I have a scream.
It'll be. I don't think we're going to get one of those moments, but it will be interesting to see when we've got such an interesting field. Whether or not Elizabeth Warren stepped up and did well. By the way, one piece on Nevada before we go. The Nevada caucus is happening on Saturday. There are about 60,000. They're doing it really weird. They're having people be able to pre-vote, and about 60,000 ballots were cast by between Saturday and Tuesday of this past week. So. And then they're going to have people who can show up and vote as well if they did not cast a ballot. What that means is for the Nevada caucus, probably more than half of the people who voted in the Nevada caucus have already voted, and the debate has zero impact on that because they already cast their ballot before Michael Bloomberg got pounded and before this past debate. So it further devalued the Nevada caucus. The Nevada caucus is having any kind of validity, but it will be interesting to see what happens there. The real test, once again, is South Carolina, which is a week from Saturday, because that's where you have 60% of the electorate, the Democratic electorate, being African American. And if you get a low turnout amongst African American voters in South Carolina, it will show there's a real rejection of the Democratic candidates by a base constituency of the Democrats, and that Donald Trump's inroads into the black community, not through pandering, but through policy that actually increases their people's wages, people's job opportunities, and ending a system which basically put a lot of African Americans in jail for a long time, and finding a way to create equity in terms of releasing people out of the federal prison system. By the way, legislation which I didn't support, but he did, and Donald Trump made it happen, and we'll see if that has an impact on African American voters. The first time we'll see that is in South Carolina, and it won't be because of votes for Donald Trump. It will be because of low African American voter turnout in South Carolina. So we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to watch.
Okay, now also I just wanted to go over the polling information. In Nevada, Sanders, according to Real Clear Politics, is up 14 points. In South Carolina, Biden is up 3.4 points. Sanders seems to have some momentum there. Believe it or not, Tom Steyer is doing good in South Carolina. I forgot he was even running.
Tom Steyer's invested a huge amount of money into South Carolina. He's put together an organization, a Democrat organization in South Carolina. He's bought a lot of talent, in South Carolina, and should I say, and I'm not going to say he bought endorsements, but a lot of people found him to be a credible person to endorse in South Carolina, and they happen to be being paid by him. So so yeah, South Carolina will be where Tom Steyer kind of makes his stand. He either shows up in the polling, he either shows up in the vote, or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, he goes away. If he does a respectable job in South Carolina, he has a pathway in Super Tuesday, which he can afford to compete in. But once again, you only have 3 or 4 days after South Carolina Super Tuesday, and Michael Bloomberg has been buying up a huge amount of talent in the Super Tuesday states. He's also been spending an incredible amount of money on advertising. And so if there's a place where Michael Bloomberg will show up, it'll be Super Tuesday. Bernie Sanders has also put a lot of money into organization into Super Tuesday states. So it will be a real test on Super Tuesday to see what happens. But right now, Tom Steyer should show better in South Carolina than anybody expects, because he is really invested in the state to try to make a stand there.
Okay, the hyper-informed one, Rick Manning. Thank you so much for your time here, and thank you for joining us. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please subscribe here. You see I'm pointing at it now. Please subscribe here to our channel, and thank you for watching the Americans for Limited Government podcast. We will be back tomorrow.
Take care, folks.